Across the nation, there are hundreds of thousands of religious congregations. And as Lisa Desjardins reports, some of the biggest, known as megachurches, are facing challenges as the culture around organized religion changes.
Christian congregations with 2,000 worshipers or more. Recently, though, megachurches have also been in the spotlight for the resignations of two high-profile pastors.
The empire of American megachurches, which for decades shaped the culture and finances of much of the United States, is facing an unprecedented collapse. To get an idea of what this means in practice, in-person attendance at these gigantic temples has plummeted between 30% and 40% since the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. And the most alarming data for these institutions is that this decline has neither stopped nor recovered in recent years. What we are seeing now is the exposure of a fundamental flaw in the very business and faith model that guaranteed the success of these organizations for so long. It is a moment of rupture that reveals an uncomfortable truth about the foundation of these hundreds of millions of dollars structures. The central tension of this story lies in a paradox that is now taking its toll. This entire church model was meticulously designed for mass appeal, using the most sophisticated marketing and entertainment techniques to attract and retain crowds. But this system failed spectacularly at the exact moment the spectacle was removed from the equation. When the lights went out and the stages became empty, it became clear that the basis of everything was not necessarily faith, but rather the consumption experience. The leaders of these empires expected that, after the isolation, there would be a pent-up demand and a triumphant return of the faithful to their seats. Instead, what we see today are arenas with a capacity for 52,000 people, such as the headquarters of Lakewood Church in Houston, now operating melancholically, with the space half empty. The audience, being forced to stay home and follow everything on screens, realized something that the pastors did not foresee. People noticed that they did not miss church in the way that was expected, or at least not that specific church. And to understand how we got to this point of emptiness, we need to look back and see how this machine was built layer by layer. The rise of this model was not an accident, but a calculated response to the desires of the average American consumer. It all began with pioneers like Robert Schuller, a man who understood the psychology of comfort early on. Schuller started broadcasting his services from the roof of a drive-in movie snack bar in Orange County, California. He realized that Americans wanted convenience and soft armchairs, not hard wooden pews and the austere environment of traditional churches. His theology, the so-called possibility thinking, paved the way for what would become the prosperity gospel. He materialized this vision in the Crystal Cathedral, a monument with 10,000 glass windows that signaled that faith could be above all transparent, modern, and focused on success. In the 80s, the model gained corporate sophistication with Bill Hybels at Willow Creek Community Church near Chicago. Hybels perfected what became known as the seeker-sensitive strategy, which had a simple goal: to make the church look like anything but a church. Pay attention to this point, because it changes the entire calculation of the religious experience. Hybels eliminated crosses, stained glass, and any traditional religious symbol, creating in its place a campus that resembled a tech company headquarters. There were theaters, food courts, and bookstores where sermons focused on practical tips for daily life instead of discussions about deep theological doctrine. At the same time, Rick Warren launched Saddleback Church in Southern California, taking this systematization to an almost scientific level. Warren researched demographics and actively worked to eliminate all objections a non-attendee might have against religion. If the problem was organ music, he put rock bands. If the problem was suits and ties, he encouraged the use of shorts and flip-flops. If the problem was long sermons, he limited them to 25 minutes of motivational messages. It worked spectacularly at the time, with Saddleback growing to 20,000 members and Warren becoming an advisor to presidents, even giving the invocation at Barack Obama's inauguration in 2009. But the pinnacle and the final personification of this spectacle model goes by the name of Joel Osteen. He took over Lakewood Church in 1999 after his father's death, having never preached a sermon before, but with an ace up his sleeve: years of experience in television production. Osteen transformed preaching into a high-definition entertainment product. He completely abandoned themes such as sin, judgment, or theological complexity, transforming each intervention into a motivational speech seasoned with isolated biblical verses. It was a fusion of Oprah Winfrey with the prosperity gospel, delivered with an impeccable smile and top-notch stage lighting. The public response was explosive, and the numbers seemed to justify the strategy. In 2005, Osteen spent more than $75 million to renovate the Compaq Center, which was the former home of the Houston Rockets basketball team, transforming the arena into the largest church in America with 16,000 seats. His sermons were broadcast to more than 100 countries, and he moved into a $10 million mansion, justifying his fortune as a sign of divine blessing. In 2010, the United States already had about 1,600 megachurches, some equipped with water parks and climbing walls within their complexes. The problem is that these institutions operated under the premise that numerical growth was the only valid measure of God's approval. This created a perverse pressure on leaders to keep people always happy and entertained, which meant avoiding any controversial topic that could drive away the customer. Because let's be honest, when you have a giant payroll and millions of dollars in loan installments to pay for stadiums, you cannot afford to challenge your audience. And this is where the story gets really complicated, because a fundamental crack had already appeared long before any virus isolated the world. In 2007, Bill Hybels, the godfather of the movement himself, decided to commission a deep study at his church, Willow Creek, to verify if all that apparatus was truly fulfilling its mission. The results were a reality shock for the leadership. The study revealed that massive participation in the church was not creating real spiritual growth. People attended services, volunteered, and participated in small groups, but felt spiritually empty. They behaved like consumers of religious products, not like people transformed by deep faith. Hybels publicly admitted the mistake, saying that they should have taught people to feed themselves, spiritually speaking. This was an impressive confession, but the machine was already too big to be stopped. Budgets continued to expand, buildings continued to rise, and the model continued to be copied throughout the country, built on the flawed assumption that people came for God. In fact, as the data now suggests, many came only for the spectacle and the facilitated sense of community belonging. March 15, 2020, was the catalyst that exposed this fragility on a national scale that no one could ignore. When the church doors were locked, what disappeared overnight was precisely the sensory experience that kept the system alive. The energy of the crowd, the professional sound, the light shows, the gourmet coffees in the lobby, and the ultra-produced children's programs vanished. What was left was just a video on a laptop screen. And here enters an element that changes the entire calculation of the faithful's loyalty. Millions of people, like Jennifer Martinez from Denver, who was a dedicated member for 8 years, had an unsettling realization during the months of isolation. Watching services from home, Jennifer realized that, divorced from all the physical spectacle, the message she heard weekly seemed superficial and tiring. She noticed that she was not learning anything new, and that the sermons about how better days are coming were practically interchangeable, no matter what week it was. This epiphany was not an isolated case. It was repeated millions of times in living rooms across the United States. People began to look for substance elsewhere, migrating to theology podcasts, dense books, or even small liturgical churches with only 60 people, where human connection was real and not mediated by a giant LED screen. The practical result was catastrophic for the finances and logistics of megachurches. When the sanitary restrictions ended and they finally reopened, attendance simply did not return to previous levels. Worse than that, it continued to fall. A 2023 study revealed that 40% of Americans who attended church regularly before the pandemic now do so much less frequently or have abandoned the habit altogether. And when we look at the generational breakdown, the scenario is even bleaker for these institutions. The decline reaches almost 60% among young people aged 18 to 29. See what happened next to the biggest brands in this religious market. Saddleback Church, once the gold standard of growth, saw its weekly attendance plummet from 30,000 to 15,000 people after Rick Warren's retirement in 2021. This forced the institution to make severe staff cuts and cancel programs that had existed for decades. At Joel Osteen's Lakewood, the administration now needs to isolate entire sections of the 16,000-seat arena so that the emptiness is not so evident in TV broadcasts. It is physical proof that much of the appeal was being in the middle of the crowd and not necessarily hearing the message. Other empires collapsed even more dramatically due to leadership issues that the celebrity pastor model ends up encouraging. Willow Creek collapsed after Bill Hybels resigned in 2018 amidst allegations of sexual misconduct, seeing its number of faithful fall from 25,000 to about 7,000. But the case of Mars Hill Church in Seattle is perhaps the most extreme example of the volatility of this system. Pastor Mark Driscoll managed to attract 15,000 people, but after his resignation in 2014, due to accusations of abusive leadership, the entire church simply dissolved in a few months. All 15 campuses closed their doors, proving that a religious empire based on a single personality can disappear overnight. Even the physical monuments of this movement are changing hands. Robert Schuller's Crystal Cathedral, that original symbol of megachurch success with its glass walls, had to be sold to the Catholic Church in 2012 after the ministry went bankrupt. This is not a minor detail. It is an ironic symbol that Schuller's pioneering model could not sustain itself financially or maintain its generational relevance. And this current crisis was exacerbated by two external factors that megachurches could not control. First, there was the complete democratization of Christian content by technology. In the 80s and 90s, these giant churches had a practical monopoly on high-quality production. If you wanted to hear a great speaker or well-produced Christian music, you had to go to them or buy their tapes and CDs. Today, anyone with a smartphone can access the best preachers, theologians, and musicians in the world at any time. The competitive advantage of the large building and the illuminated stage evaporated. Second, the prosperity gospel, which served as the backbone of many of these organizations, sounded terribly hollow when the reality of COVID brought death, grief, and real economic hardship into homes. The message that God wants you to be always rich and healthy lost its resonance amidst widespread suffering and unemployment lines. Younger generations, in particular, are showing that they are looking for something radically different. They seek authenticity instead of production value. They want communities that engage with social justice and that have space for honest doubt, values for which the rigid and optimistic megachurch model was never built. To understand the depth of this change, listen to what Marcus Thompson, a 32-year-old man who grew up in a megachurch in Atlanta and has not set foot in a service for 3 years, says. He explains the situation as follows. I don't think I lost my faith. I think I lost my faith in this model. I'm reading theology now. I'm praying, I'm trying to live what Jesus really taught about caring for the poor and loving your neighbor. But I'm doing it outside the institution that told me that success meant a big building and a charismatic pastor. This statement by Marcus captures the core of this entire transformation we are witnessing. We are not necessarily facing a generalized crisis of faith, but rather a mass rejection of an institutional model that has become heavy, expensive, and, for many, irrelevant. The spectacle stopped satisfying the spiritual hunger of a population that went through a collective global trauma and emerged from it seeking deeper and less choreographed connections. Now, why does this matter to outsiders? It matters because the fate of these megachurches serves as a warning about what happens when marketing replaces substance in any area of public life. The debate that remains open today is no longer whether the golden age of megachurches is ending. Attendance data and finances have already answered that. The real question is what will fill the vacuum left by them. The story of the future of faith in America is being written now, but it is not happening in those gigantic, half-empty auditoriums that cost millions to maintain. It is emerging in small neighborhood churches, in informal gatherings in homes, in online communities, and in coffee shop conversations. It is being written by people who are trying to figure out what authentic faith looks like when the show is over and the crowd leaves. What remains are immense buildings that are beginning to be sold and transformed into commercial centers, while the public seeks something that money and stage production could not deliver. What happens to the leadership of these groups, now that the model of absolute command and spectacle has been challenged, is the next frontier we will monitor. The collapse of megachurches proves that, when faith is treated as a product, it is subject to the obsolescence of any market. These millions of dollars arenas are turning into monuments of an emptiness that entertainment can no longer hide. Is it possible to sustain a mass religion today without transforming it into a marketing spectacle? Comment. If you believe that these temples still have a chance to reinvent themselves, or if the industrial model of faith has come to a definitive end. Subscribe to follow this geopolitical and cultural transition. Click on Become a Member to support the channel and watch the indicated video about the new economy of digital influence now.